Let me ask you first of all about this tactic that Russia appears to be continuing to pursue, which is these strikes on the power infrastructure, power stations, and so on, which are causing blackouts to millions of Ukrainians right across the country.
Well, we divide the theatre of war into three parts: the close battle, the fighting which we saw at Kherson, and the successes of the Ukrainians in Kharkiv and Kiev, and what we've seen here, which is the deep battle. And the deep battle is where Russia seeks to dislocate and disrupt and destroy the military, economic, and industrial potential of Ukraine so that it saps the will of the Ukrainian people to resist. Because if you sap the will of that part of the constituency and what we call the Clausewitzian Trinity, the people, the armed forces, and the government, then you cannot campaign anymore. Now, it's not happening at the moment, and it never has happened in history. And we're at month 9 of the Ukrainian campaign. If you look at month 8, when the Germans were doing the same thing to the UK in 1940, you see the same things that we see in Ukraine. That trust in leadership, which was a thing which sustained people, the fact that they believed that they would have ultimate victory and that they had a just cause. And of course, the just cause for the Ukrainians is that they see a genocidal Russia, and that if they don't fight, their sovereignty is finished.
And when the Ukrainians, as they have done in Kherson, have managed to retake territory from the occupying Russian forces, they appear to be uncovering more evidence of atrocities. And of course, that behavior by the Russians, if anything, is strengthening the resolve of the Ukrainian people.
Well, I've always said that it's not armies that fight wars, it's nations that fight wars. And that was the thing that the Russians misunderstood from the invasion of Crimea in 2014, that over the next 8 years, the Ukrainians rose to their nationhood. And of course, everywhere they go, you see these massacres in Irpin, in Bucha, now it appears here. And of course, that's going to make sure that the resolve of the Ukrainians is there, because they do understand that this is a genocidal regime which has been morally compromised, and there is no way that you can negotiate with those. And that was one of the other interesting things this week, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff sort of said the tempo of ops, because of the winter coming, may slow things, and that may give a window for negotiation. But Zaluzhny, General Zaluzhny, the head of the Ukrainian armed forces, reply was that there's only one condition for negotiations, and that is Russia must leave all the occupied territories. And of course, he's correct, because from a Russian perspective, even though you have at the moment the hawks, the ultra nationalists who would want to escalate and possibly go to the right of arc, including weapons of mass destruction, even those who are, we'll call the realists in Russia at the moment, who are not doves, do not want to go back to a pre 24 February position. They want to freeze the conflict where it is. That is absolutely not acceptable from a Ukrainian position.
Let me ask you about a story which has just broken in the last half hour on the Times newspaper website. Russia's claiming to have tested successfully its new Satan II intercontinental ballistic missile, which it says can deliver multiple nuclear warheads to overwhelm defense systems. This is the second time that Russia has claimed this. What do you make of the significance of this?
I don't think there's any significance to that. You have an intercontinental ballistic missile force, and you need to test that force, because rocket science is called that, because it's hard. Rocket science is hard. This is opposite of what we've heard this week from Putin. And I think one of the most significant things again this week occurred at the G20 summit in Bali, when Xi, for the first time, said that the threat or the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine is not acceptable. That's a reinforcement of a position from January. So that is the most significant things. I don't think we're seeing an escalation at the moment in rhetoric. That's just another part of the nuclear extortion, possibly, that Putin might do in the future, but I don't think he's in that position at the moment. And of course, we've seen no change in posture to the nuclear profile of the Russians.
There were real fears of escalation of the Ukraine conflict earlier in the week when we had this missile that landed on Polish territory, which killed two people. Now, it took a relatively short period of time before NATO's leader Jens Stoltenberg was saying that he believed that this was inadvertently brought down by Ukrainian air defences. But President Zelensky was still saying that he believed it was a Russian missile. What is the latest evidence we have on what happened here?
Well, like all these things, you've got to investigate and determine. But I don't think those who were sage and wise within the command structure of NATO and sage and wise politicians went to this sort of maximalist position about Article 5 with Russia. That was really just the sort of Twitter sphere and social media. And I think you have to go back really to sort of 2015 and see the same sage and wise people, because in that year, you might remember, Carol, that November 15, the Turks, a NATO member, shot down a Russian plane which was in over the border from Syria. And the same things happened then in terms of Twitter and the social media going ballistic, but those in authority saying, we need to stay calm, de-escalate. That was the reality of political decision making, and those who actually matter, not those in social media and the media more generally on that position.
It did nonetheless show the risks of what is happening in Ukraine, and particularly when you've got those continued bombardments from Russian missiles, the risk of some sort of error, some mistake, some blunder, or even just a misunderstanding of what is going on.
That's true, but that's why you make sure that you keep dialogue on all these things, and why, for example, we've seen Director Burns from the CIA meeting his counterpart from the Russians in earlier on this week. So as long as you continue that dialogue, then these misunderstandings shouldn't take place. Having said that, of course, there are still ways that Russia could escalate, and I talked earlier on about the sort of nationalist part who won't concede anything, and you can really escalate in sort of three ways, which we could have seen on that what happened in Poland. That's targets, objectives, and geography. And in geography, in this case, I do mean the NATO countries. So if Russia were to perceive themselves not only to be losing, but their own future as a sovereign country is at stake, because there are centripetal forces which could break Russia apart in the future. There are 22 non-Russian republics within the country, then they could go to an escalatory posture. We're nowhere near that at the moment. But what the Russians really seek to do at the moment is freeze that conflict over the winter so that they can keep the gains that they've got. And we can't really allow them to do that if you believe in justice and the ethics of war and the rightness of sovereign territory for a country to defend itself.